World War II needs no introduction. Europe, and eventually the entire planet, was ripped in two, headed by the Germans. In the First World War, ironically called the War to End All Wars, railroads were given very small range of use. In World War II, the story couldn't be any more different. Railways were absolutely essential to the outcome of the war. As soon as the war began, the British, who are normally known for their very colorful locomotives, painted every single one into a wartime black livery. The only signification given to an engine were a few letters on its side to know who owned it, typically 2 to 4 letters. From a small engine to the pride of Britain's railways, none escaped the repaint. However, Britain expected Germany to attempt bombings or an invasion. To ensure Germans wouldn't know which trains to stop or destroy, each engine was given 2 numbers. On one side of the engine's cab would be their actual number that the railway knew them by, and on the other side of the cab was a random fake number, just to confuse the Germans. For example, the Flying Scotsman's real number during the war was 103, short for 60103. However, on the other side of its cab was 105. While a good plan, each Allied and Axis country was using locomotives anywhere from 5 to 50 years old. The best engineers and steam locomotive designers of each nation were brought together to design the best locomotives possible for the war. Designed to be easy to maintain, cheap to produce, and have extreme pulling power, some of these locomotives broke world records even to this day. The British planned to use London, Midland, and Scotland railway engines, including their Ginties, as their mass-produced engines of choice. However, they dug up older designs, modernizing them, and built them like there wasn't going to be a tomorrow. These designs were called the Austerities. 377 of their 060 saddle tank designs were built, 935 of their 280 tender engines were built, and 150 of their larger siblings, the 210 tender engines, were built. However, the previously mentioned 060 Ginties did see plenty of use, but only received minor modifications for war and weren't built to the same extent as the others. The Americans, though not joining the war formally yet, were there from the start, being Britain's allies. The United States also built several types of engines for the war effort. Unlike World War I, they weren't just Americanizing older designs. New designs were built from the ground up, only slightly restricted to fit on British railway regulations. The USATC S160s were 280 tender engines built for heavy freight duties. Nearly every engineering facility in the United States was building these engines for war, totaling 2,120 locomotives. The other locomotives America sent over were the S100s, a small type of tank engine meant for switching in yards and pulling short-distance trains. 382 of these were built, and became extremely popular after the war. They gained the loving nickname Yank Tanks. European engines tend to be much smaller than American engines, despite running on the exact same track. While building smaller engines to be sent to the British was useful, the boom in production and construction meant the United States needed its own engines to move more goods faster than ever. This need was filled by the class of engines that have become permanently rooted in American railroad history. These are the Challengers. And the big boys. Yes, that is the official name. Looming behemoths of the rails, with anywhere from 12 to 16 driving wheels alone, these became the biggest locomotives to ever run on American soil, and still hold that record to this day. The big boys and Challengers were built to scale the Rocky Mountains with ease, with a massive train of cars in tow. Resources were moved across the United States faster than ever before. While the majority of England and the Allies relied on the WD, or the War Department, for railway management, the Germans had their... how do you pronounce that?
Krx Locomotives.
Yeah, that. It literally translates to war locomotives. Pretty straightforward. 28 different classes of locomotives were mass-produced, and a bare minimum of 10,000 engines were built in total, with many more undocumented, meaning God knows how many more there are. However, the most deadly railroad technology has yet to be discussed. Railway guns, informally and incorrectly called railguns, are massive firearms loaded onto specially built railroad cars. Sometimes these cars can be 2 tracks wide just to house the massive gun-on-train wheels. Used as early as the American Civil War, Their final uses came in World War II. Both Great Britain and Nazi Germany built massive railway guns capable of firing straight across the English Channel. That is not an exaggeration. These guns each ranged from 9 to 18 inches. Guns of this size, however, were rarely used. Smaller types that could be transported in mass were often used, generally 3 to 4 at a time. If any part of railroad history is known about World War II, I guarantee what you're thinking of is this image. The infamous rails to the camps of Nazi Germany. Jewish people were loaded into cattle wagons and freight cars, packed like sardines, and shipped off like common goods to any ordinary destination. These rides were awful. No bathrooms, no food, no sitting down. If someone passed out, or passed away during the journey, there was nothing that could be done but try to ignore the smell of your loved one rotting on the floor in front of you. The final destinations of these trains were the concentration camps, including the most famous, Gate of Death. So to recap, how did railroads change and adapt to World War II? Well, compared to World War I, they saw much more use. Tens of thousands of locomotives were built by dozens of countries for use in the war. Records were broken, cleverly confusing numbers were implemented, and the bleak black steam engines screaming across the rough tracks were always a grim reminder of how bad things had truly become. However, if any of you folks are interested in reading further, links will be down in the description for all sources and sources for media that is used in the video.